Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is to understand a little bit more in depth on how to move successfully through an experience of narcissistic abuse or in a relationship where they have been mistreated. They have experienced emotional abuse, physical abuse, emotional harm, degradation, humiliation, all those sort of negatives that can go on when you are in a relationship with someone who might have a sort of personality disorder, such as we see with the cluster B personality disorders in the DSM when they talk about, the narcissistic and then the antisocial and the psychopathic behavior disorders. When you get more into that more severe category on the whole spectrum, we're talking about people who have a pathological sense of self-importance and coupled with a lack of empathy, and particularly as it manifests, I would say, in a deficit of acknowledging and validating your feelings, needs, wishes, desires, or opinions, or that's sort of, as a viewer so aptly said, their sort of B state, like who they are. And there's a real soreness, I would say, in a lot of those victims because they have not been heard, seen, acknowledged, or validated for where they are coming from, sort of beyond with what the narcissist sees. Because the problem with the sort of narcissist is they're sort of an emotional short-sightedness. All they see is what they desire, which is nothing wrong with that, but oftentimes they don't have the ability to connect with the needs, feelings of others. So this makes them prone to exploit, take advantage, or hurt others, particularly when it comes to creating a fear or a feeling of insecurity, which is known as self-doubt. When you feel very unsure of self, you are unsure if people like you. You are unsure if people love you. That is really sort of the foundation of insecurity. And that insecurity is born and created and fostered through emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, which means sort of the, constant criticism, the hyper-criticism, the hyper-judgment, sets up the grounds for that insecurity that creates self-doubt and lack of authority or autonomy within the individual, within, that person who is in the other part of the relationship, the other half, the receiving end of the emotional abuse. And along with that, I think what people don't understand is it creates sort of a learned expectation. So for them to understand why this anxiety is so, why this fear has been set up of, so like, how do you move through that insecurity and back into solid ground? Well, realize that there is a certain degree of self-doubt that is promulgated in a narcissist relationship so that others aren't able to sort of deflect, to deflect some sort of attack, or criticism, but they're taught that is the normal, that being criticized is the normal, to being cut down is the normal, to being in a negative environment is normal, and then they adapt to a profoundly sick environment, so they end up not being able to shine, not to be able to be solid, not being able to sort of be themselves and to have self-expression in the relationship. And this is part of the dynamic of understanding and to ascertain if this is what you have experienced. And then the problem though is because of the narcissist, they have this sort of this superiority complex, which, the problem, it's okay to have, healthy, feel good about yourself in a healthy way, in a balanced way, in a non-extreme way. The narcissist, they get into a real extreme, and it puts a certain undue stress or pressure on others, which is not based on sort of reality or, sensitivity to a true connection because of the lack of empathy. There's not a connection that's able to be made. And there, I would say the problem, as which the viewer had said, is I would feel to sort of create a phrase or coin a phrase or sort of this learned expectation of being insulted, a learned expectation of being degraded, a learned expectation of being insulted, humiliated, made the brunt of jokes, sarcastic, comments towards yourself, you personally, which are then designed to sort of degrade one's self. There's always that constant complaining of the narcissist of others. Others just don't match up. They are not good enough. There's always some sort of flaw. There's always, and this is really where the emotional abuse is, because when we talk about emotional abuse in terms of the umbrella of narcissistic abuse, we're talking about hurting somebody's feelings. Just like you talk about kids on the playground. What did they do? Well, they hurt my feelings. That is a child, but we're talking about when it becomes a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more complex in the dynamic when you are in a love relationship or what is supposed to be a trust relationship with someone who is narcissistic, who does not have the other's best interests at hand. Instead, it is at their best interest or their expediency or what they want to procure for themselves. In other words, that requires them to sort of shut down and be maligned even to, or have disdain for the appeal, for the feelings, needs, wishes of others. So it creates this sort of disdain for others, that is when, emotional abuse is taking place. When you are the subject of disdain or scorn, just sort of, this is known as character assassination. This can become a very big problem when people find this in their marriage or in their workplace, their community, or their family, or what have you. And I would say the learned expectations, the individuals who then find themselves enmeshed in this and unable to get out, oftentimes because of certain dependencies, or maybe you're living, or working in this, in this, so it is just sort of a given. It is just sort of there, and it is not to be escaped. It becomes a constant reality. So it becomes a very negative climate, devoid of the opposite, which is warmth, nurturing, compassion, understanding, which is empathy, which is being able to, understand. But instead, I would say when you are in a relationship with someone who's at that, that end of the spectrum where it's really malignant, where these people become insultory, derogatory, they really engage in a lot of the sort of, smear campaign, throwing you under the bus, there's always something wrong with you. This then creates learned expectations in the victim, meaning they always expect that there's going to be some agitation, that there's always going to be some eggshells, rather than solid ground, rather than, harmony, peace, and harmony, which is solid, which is, not, filled with fear and riddled with tension and sort of a mental game, or, fighting manipulation tactic, which, the fighting and argumentation is just nothing more than a manipulation tactic at power and control. But it's, there becomes an insidious circle in a narcissist where they have disdain, but they want to control. So it becomes, a very, I would say, a double bind and a very difficult situation, and really a trap for a lot of people who find themselves maybe even codependent, seeking to please this type of person. And then so there's these sort of learned expectations, I would say, very much like the learned hopelessness or learned helplessness we were discussing on the live. And I'm sorry if you all didn't get a chance to do it. We'll do that again. We'll see how it goes. And if we're going to keep that as a regular feature. But, we talked about learned helplessness and learned hopelessness, and you can check that out on the lives. But I really do feel that there becomes something almost as a learned, expectations, just sort of an experience of sort of a learned expectancy within the individual who has been around this sort of emotional abuse, this sort of constant criticism and degrading, defiling you. I mean, and it's very condition based. So it's obviously something that people can never overcome, but they will try to overcome, and to clear the air or just have some sort of communication, or about what is so wrong. And it's usually they're coming always from a place of anger, within them, which is usually their own anger or their own fear of some sort, which is sourced from usually some unknown source or from back way before. But the learned, and I think that the learned expectation is responsible for a lot of the stubborn social anxieties and the triggering that people experience as a result of being in these abusive dynamic relationships. And so if you can kind of look at that, because it's been reinforced, so you have this expectation that something is going to go awry, something is going to go amiss, something is, you're going to do just hideously wrong, and you're a miserable person, and that quality you can never overcome or redeem yourself, basically is how the narcissist seeks to do it, as if one is under their thumb, just like the Rolling Stones song. But I think that to try to understand, so you have to really look at what are your own expectations of yourself. What sort of expectations do you have of yourself? And what are you really rewarded from pursuing? What is that sacredness for you? What is that strength? What is that comfort? What is that ideal? And it is not something that has to please another. It's about pleasing yourself and being okay with what is nurturing and feeding to yourself. Because oftentimes, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you are going to be starved or deprived of that. You are not going to be on the receiving end of your needs getting met. In fact, you might just find that you're going through a good segment or part of your life without your needs being met. And that, really starts to disrupt the amygdala and the hippocampus, those parts of the brain that have to do with fear and with memory. And so you have to realize, and really realize that, that you don't want, that hyper arousal to be part of your operating system, that you are best at a balance and a homeostasis. And sometimes, coming out of apathy or coming out from that self-doubt or self-recrimination or those self-limiting beliefs, which become installed once you're in that sort of dynamic, it becomes a given. It's sort of a rearrangement of your boundaries that are there to meet their needs and have nothing to do with your needs. And it becomes very important to see that clearly. And and you need to learn to regulate your emotions then, because oftentimes if you're dealing with a narcissist or a borderline, really you're dealing with a dysregulation of emotions. And that will create a dysregulation of emotions in those people, particularly that of self-doubt, feeling of inferiority and inadequacy. So those are the trigger states that are tried to be created. The inadequacy, incompetency, is really how they try to downgrade others and then assume control, or that, that superior mode. That's how they set that up, that dynamic up. So you have to then identify, then I would say, those triggers then that cause you to disconnect or to become overly anxious or worried. What is it exactly? And, maybe you don't like to, you really have a certain way about you, which perhaps has not been embraced or understood, or has been any effort to be at that way. So if you're dealing with someone without empathy, they're not really going to have that effort to get to know you. They don't create that safe environment. They create an unsafe environment. That's how they create fear where there is none. They create problems where there is none. They create fights where there is none. They just, it's part of the passive aggressive personality and communication style that you will get. So that passive aggressive meaning very indirect communication. There is no give and take. There is no open channel. If you're dealing with, a manipulator who is trying to be sly, there's only very limited snippets of information, and they'll be it's like a very disrespectful way of communicating, withholding a lot, not sharing. I mean, just all that withholding of information and common courtesies, I would say, is part and typical, that typifies also that narcissist personality that creates sort of these learned expectations, which create that fear sort of, foundation, that insecure foundation. So one that causes you to always second guess, doubt yourself. You're always the problem. They have never done anything wrong. All these different, things, that is the problem. When you start to deal with a narcissist, and definitely with a psychopath, they don't feel that they have done anything wrong, when there is, definitely things that they have done wrong to hurt others, to take advantage, to throw people under the bus, meaning to try to, annihilate or, basically engage in character assassination of you behind your back, recriminating so they can build all sorts of things up without any sort of checks and balances or anything of that nature. It's very sly, dirty, and it will usually result in a lot of that sort of tension and what you would call the passive aggressive communication, where you think you're on a relationship with somebody, and all of a sudden you find out that they're cheating on you and they're dating, and with somebody else. This is passive aggressive, where they're not able to communicate with you directly, but they act it out in some other way. Or, that they're angry and then they end up smashing the car by accident. They end up hurting themselves by accident prone. They just want to get out of it. They just don't want to do whatever work or whatever effort is required. So, get yourself off that sort of, stop beating yourself up. What you're doing is you're doing the narcissist work. They're trying to beat you up, so you end up beating your own self up. So don't continue that cycle. Break that pattern, but break that cycle, and engage in more of a calm and more of sort of a stress-free, which is the absence of that pressure. It can be a real pressure cooker to be around the expectations, which oftentimes are unrealistic expectations of the narcissist. Unrealistic expectations that are set forth, that are grandiose, that don't have a certain foundation or practicality. This is where they, create that thrill and the excitement, and they try to outwit and outsmart people to get to follow them along. So realize and what is realistic and practical, and what is rewarding, and what is have the ability to really become and blossom into something which is more warm and validating. And you'll sort of know that there's an okayness with you. You'll feel okay. You will feel safe. You will feel that you don't have to be, in the line of attack or some sort of recriminating remark to be made against you. Just, just for, it's just everyday play. It's just how, and that becomes very exhausting and debilitating for people. So don't, just numb out and develop a callous and then isolate yourself. Realize that is just the result of emotional abuse that's designed to create that insecurity, so you really don't ever experience a strength in that autonomy. And don't falter for that sort of result. Realize that you have the choice to control and regulate your own emotions, your own I am, what is important and special to you. And you don't have to explain and justify that to anybody. That is of your decision making. And yes, sure, there might be all sorts of great inputs from people and things, but when it's expectations that create fear, anxiety, instability, then you have to reconnect with your strength within. This is very important. And I would definitely say that resetting your own expectations for yourself and what you would like to have that aligns with your own values, meaning and not just pleasing the narcissist, but because that will become hollow. That will become a lot of stress, and it will not be oftentimes be sustainable. You have to answer, I would say, and you have to be accountable to yourself and your own self-respect, and what that means as a number one. Oftentimes people give up their slot and they become the last in line. They're the last to receive. Everybody else go ahead before me. They become ultra altruistic. This becomes denial. This becomes self-degradation. It becomes self-sabotage, and then social anxiety. So reset your expectations for yourself as you know them to be correct, that are based on safety and serenity, that are based on peace and acceptance, that are based on your authentic happiness, and that are not derailed sort of by the tensions of others, that are designed to throw you off and set up expectations which are not really that you can own within, something that you can embrace within. Be careful of that, and I would say beware of that, and be willing to say no to specific pressures that you are not comfortable with. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussions, and support. Peace within, peace without, peace be with you, and have a beautiful evening.